My long-term girlfriend slapped me across the jaw when I handed her the keys to a brand new car, snarling that the model was as cheap and useless as I was. I dumped her right then and there. Now she's desperately crawling back in tears. I'm a 31-year-old guy working as a logistics director in Chicago. It's a high-stress, putting out fires kind of job, but it pays roughly $160K annually, which afforded me a solid life, a nice condo, a good safety net. I thought my home was my sanctuary. I was wrong. It was just a slow-bleeding liability. I met Tara 3 years ago. My friend Reed threw a rooftop party in the West Loop, and she was there. She was a freelance interior designer, charismatic, gorgeous, and vibrating with this restless energy that I completely fell for. We clicked instantly. 6 months in, her lease expired. Her landlord was jacking up the rent, and she claimed her freelance work had dried up because of the economy. It seemed like the logical step, so she moved into my condo. That was the beginning of the slide. First, it was just the groceries. Then, I took over her student loan payments so she could breathe. Then, it was her premium gym membership. Before I knew it, I was funding a startup design business for her that never seemed to materialize into actual clients or revenue. Anytime I asked to see a business plan or gently inquired about her financial contributions, she would twist the conversation. She'd get teary, accusing me of suffocating her creative process. She told me I was trying to trap her in a corporate mindset. So, I kept quiet. I loved her, and I figured she just needed runway to get her business off the ground. I just paid the bills. Last spring, I decided to do something massive. Tara had been relentlessly complaining about her 10-year-old sedan. It was constantly in the shop, constantly leaking fluid, and she made sure I knew how embarrassing it was for her to pull up to client meetings, the few she supposedly had, in a beater. I wanted to fix it. I spent months quietly routing portions of my bonuses into a separate account. I saved up $42,500 in cash to buy her a sleek, brand-new crossover SUV outright. I wanted the reveal to be unforgettable. My grandparents were celebrating their golden anniversary, and the family had rented out a private banquet room at the Oak Brook Country Club. The entire extended family was there, over 60 people. My notoriously strict grandfather, Conrad, was sitting at the head table. My two brothers, Owen and Duncan, were there with their wives. Tara loved high society events. She lived for the aesthetic of them. She was dressed to the nines in a backless silk gown, sipping champagne and working the room like she owned it. Before the toast began, I slipped out to the coat room. I needed to grab my iPad from my duffel bag to set up a family slideshow I'd put together for my grandparents. I unlocked the iPad. Tara's phone was still synced to my iCloud. She had done it months ago when she set up her business account on my devices and never logged out. I never snooped. I didn't care. But the screen lit up before I could open the photo app. An iMessage banner popped down at the top of the screen. It was from a contact named Dex. He was a real estate broker she supposedly did staging for. Babe, pretend to love whatever cheap gift he gives you tonight. Once his bonus clears, we're taking the Porsche to Cabo. I stopped breathing. The coat room smelled like damp wool and expensive perfume, but all I felt was cold. My stomach dropped into a bottomless pit. I tapped the message. I shouldn't have, but I did. A whole thread loaded, weeks of it, mocking my clothes, mocking my job, detailing the trips they were going to take on my dime. I realized in the span of 30 seconds that the woman I had fully supported for over 2 years was using me as a human ATM to fund her secret double life with another man. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the iPad. A strange, dead calm washed over me. I locked the screen, put it back in the bag, and walked back out to the banquet hall. The clinking of glasses had started. It was time for the toasts. I walked right up to the front and took the microphone. I looked out at the room. I saw my grandfather, Conrad, watching me expectantly. I saw Owen and Duncan, and I saw Tara, smiling perfectly, holding her flute of champagne, looking like the picture of a devoted partner. I made a speech. I talked about family. I talked about loyalty. I talked about knowing when to invest in your future and knowing when to cut off dead weight. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. The room gasped. I heard my mother intake a sharp breath. Everyone assumed it was an engagement ring. Tara's eyes went wide. She put her champagne down and stepped forward, playing the part perfectly. She reached out, took the box, and popped it open. Inside was the black plastic fob for the crossover SUV. Her expression didn't just drop. It went dark. It was a mask slipping off. Without a word of hesitation, without even looking at my family, she swung her arm and slapped me hard across the jaw. The sharp smack echoed across the silent hall. The room froze. My jaw throbbed, a hot, stinging pain radiating up to my ear. A mid-level crossover? Tara shrieked. Her voice cracked, utterly unhinged, all the charm entirely gone. This is a pathetic soccer mom car. You think I'm driving this cheap garbage? Conrad dropped his fork onto his china plate with a loud clatter. Owen and Duncan stood up from their chairs. I didn't touch my face. I just looked at her. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened my own text thread with her. I had taken a screenshot of the iPad screen. I held the microphone up, looked her dead in the eyes, and read Dex's text out loud so the entire room of 60 people could hear it. Babe, pretend to love whatever cheap gift he gives you tonight. Once his bonus clears, we're taking the Porsche to Cabo. The color completely drained from her face. I kept my voice level. The car is strictly in my name. The dealership is taking it back tomorrow. You can find your own ride home. Completely humiliated, cornered in front of dozens of people staring at her in absolute disgust. She grabbed her champagne champagne glass and threw it at my chest. It shattered against my suit jacket. She called me a loser, turned on her heel, and stomped out of the club. I stood there, soaked in cheap sparkling wine, and for the first time in 2 years, I was suddenly breathing easier. I left the party shortly after. I drove straight back to my condo. I didn't wait around to process my feelings. I spent 3 hours completely dismantling her life in my home. I changed the passcodes on my electronic door locks. I dragged heavy-duty cardboard boxes out of the storage closet and packed all her designer clothes, her expensive makeup, her shoes, everything I had paid for. By 2:30 a.m., I had a massive pile of a dozen boxes in the hallway. I paid a premium courier service a ridiculous overnight fee to load them all up and dump them right on Dex's front porch. The driver sent me a photo of the delivery confirmation at dawn. I forwarded the picture to Tara, blocked her number, blocked her on every social media platform, and went to sleep. Fast forward 7 months. I didn't look back. I heavily invested in my career. Without her draining my accounts and my energy, I got a massive promotion. I started seeing a wonderful woman named Claire who actually matched my effort and had her own life together. I was happy. My condo felt like mine again. Then, last Wednesday at 8:45 a.m., my peaceful morning was completely shattered. I was working from home. I was in the middle of a crucial quarterly Zoom presentation. My boss, Marcus, the vice president of the company, was on the call, along with the entire executive team. We were going over Q3 logistics scaling. Suddenly, someone started frantically hammering on my front door. It wasn't a knock. It was the desperate, flat-palmed pounding of someone trying to break the wood down. The heavy door vibrated in its frame. I tried to ignore it. I moved closer to my laptop microphone. As you can see on the third slide, the pounding got louder. Then the screaming started. "Open the door. Please. You have to open the door." It was Tara. I froze. On the Zoom grid, Marcus paused, his brow furrowing. "Is everything okay on your end?" he asked. Before I could answer, Tara's voice cut through the drywall, hysterical and raw. "He took everything. I have nowhere to go. Please, I know you're in there." I hastily clicked the mute button on Zoom. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I typed a quick message in the chat, incredibly sorry, urgent building emergency at my door. 1 minute. I stood up, walked into the hallway, and looked through the peephole. Tara looked destroyed. Her hair was greasy and matted. She was wearing sweatpants and a stained jacket. She was sobbing so hard she was choking on her own breath, her mascara running down her cheeks in thick black lines. I didn't open the door. I just pressed my face near the seam. "Leave right now, Tara, or I'm calling the police." "You can't," she shrieked, slamming her hands against the wood. Dex lied. He lied about everything. She leaned her forehead against the door, crying uncontrollably. Through her sobs, the reality spilled out. Dex hadn't been a wealthy broker. He was drowning in ears debt. He had just been federally indicted for wire fraud and tax evasion. The feds had swooped in and seized all of his assets, his bank accounts, the cars, everything. She had been living in his townhouse, and it was locked down. She was completely broke, homeless, and desperate for a bailout. I made a terrible mistake. She screamed through the heavy wood. "You're my soulmate. I'm so sorry. I need a place to crash. Just for a few days, please." I felt a cold wave of disgust. "You don't live here. Get away from my door." "I can't," she wailed. I was about to walk away and dial 911, but her next words stopped me dead in my tracks. "They took the LC too," she sobbed, her voice dropping into a ragged, terrified whisper. "The design business. The one you gave me the money for." I stepped closer to the door. "What does that have to do with me?" "Dex used it," she cried, her voice trembling. "He needed a clean entity to secure a commercial lease for a warehouse space. I didn't have the credit for the guarantor paperwork." The blood drained from my face. My hand hovered over the deadbolt. "What did you do, Tara?" I demanded, my voice dangerously low. "I used your information," she choked out, "from when we lived together, from the old tax returns in your desk. You're the primary guarantor on a $60,000 defaulted lease, and Dex's lawyers are saying it's not his debt, it's yours." I stared at the thick wood of the door for 3 full seconds. My brain refused to process the words. $60,000. Defaulted lease. My information. I unlocked the deadbolt and yanked the door open. Tara stumbled forward, almost falling into my entryway. I caught her by the shoulder of her stained jacket and shoved her back out into the hall. "Show me," I said. My voice didn't even sound like my own. It was completely flat. She fumbled with a crumpled manila envelope she had clutched to her chest. Her hands were shaking so violently she dropped half the papers onto the hallway runner. I stooped down, snatched a thick stapled packet off the floor, and started reading. It was a commercial lease agreement for a 4,000 square foot warehouse space in Skokie. 3-year term. The tenant listed was Tara Designs, LLC. The guarantor, the person legally on the hook if the LLC went belly up, was me. There was my full legal name, my social security number, my old driver's license number, and at the bottom of the last page, a flawless forgery of my signature. Dex said it was just a formality, she babbled, wiping black streaks of makeup from beneath her eyes. "He said you had stellar credit and it would just bypass the underwriting. He promised he was going to pay the rent in full every month. He did, for the first 6 months. I didn't know he was using stolen money. I didn't know he was going to stop paying. You forged my signature on a commercial lease," I said, staring at the blue ink. "I didn't forge it," she cried defensively. "Dex had a guy do it. He just used the tax returns I brought him. I only brought him the papers because he said it was the only way to get the business off the ground. You were the one who always said I needed a real workspace." The sheer audacity of her logic hit me like a physical blow. She had stolen my financial documents, handed them to a con artist, let him forge my signature signature to secure a lease for a warehouse and was now standing in my hallway trying to blame me for encouraging her career. You committed identity theft, I said. That's a felony. Her eyes went wide. The panic morphed into genuine terror. No, you can't say that. If you say that, they'll arrest me. Dex's lawyers are already trying to depose me. You have the money. You make so much money. You can just settle it with the landlord. If you just pay the $60,000, it goes away. Please, I have nothing. I'm sleeping in my car. You don't have a car, I reminded her coldly. You gave the one I bought you back to the dealership, remember? She flinched. I'm not paying a dime, I told her, stepping back into my apartment. And I am calling the police the second I get off work. You're my soulmate, she screamed, lunging for the doorframe. I shoved her hand back, slammed the heavy door shut, and threw the deadbolt. She immediately started pounding again, wailing my name, but I ignored it. I walked mechanically back to my home office. My hands were vibrating. I sat down at my desk, unmuted my microphone, and looked at the Zoom grid. Marcus was staring at his webcam, looking deeply concerned. Is everything all right? We heard yelling. A disturbed neighbor, I lied smoothly, my heart hammering against my ribs. Building security is handling it. I apologize for the interruption. Let's look at the Q3 routing projections on slide 4. I delivered the rest of the presentation on pure autopilot. I spoke about freight costs and supply chain bottlenecks while a cold, heavy dread pooled in my stomach. The second the call ended and I closed my laptop, the adrenaline crashed. I picked up my phone and called Garrett. Garrett was an old college buddy who now worked as a corporate litigator downtown. He wasn't exactly a criminal defense attorney, but he knew how to navigate contracts and he knew people. I gave him the 30-second version of what had just happened in my hallway. There was a long silence on the line. Did you keep the papers she dropped? Garrett asked. I have the lease agreement sitting on my desk right now. Okay, listen to me very carefully, Garrett said, his tone shifting into complete professional mode. Do not talk to her again. If she comes back, call 911. Right now, I need you to log into all 3 credit bureaus and pull your full reports. If she had your social and your tax returns, she didn't just stop at a lease. A wave of nausea washed over me. I hadn't even thought of that. I had frozen my credit right after we broke up, but she had access to my files for months before the anniversary party. Pull them, Garrett repeated. Call me back when you have the numbers. And don't panic until we know what we're looking at. I hung up. My hands were shaking so badly, I kept mistyping my password. I logged into Experian first. My credit score, which had always hovered comfortably around 810, was sitting at 615. I clicked on the Open Accounts tab. There was my mortgage, my primary credit card, my car loan, and a business line of credit from a regional bank I had never set foot in. Opened 9 months ago, just weeks before I bought her that car. The balance was $85,000. It was maxed out. I couldn't breathe. I clicked over to TransUnion. Same story. An $85,000 business loan under Terra Designs LLC, with me listed as the personal guarantor. Combined with the defaulted lease, my total exposure was $145,000. I took a screenshot of the reports, attached the photos, and emailed them to Garrett. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. All right, Garrett said, his voice grim. It's bad, but it's fixable. You are the victim of identity theft, but you have to move immediately. You need to file a formal police report. Today, you have to list her as the primary suspect. If you hesitate, or if you try to protect her because she's your ex, the banks will argue you were complicit and hold you liable for the debt. I'm not protecting her, I snapped. I want her in jail. Good, because there's a bigger problem here, Garrett said. I just ran a quick search on Dexter Vance. The feds indicted him on Tuesday. He wasn't just dodging taxes. He was running a massive wire fraud scheme, moving stolen corporate funds through dummy LLCs to buy high-end commercial assets, luxury furniture, imported fixtures, raw materials. He paused, letting the silence hang. Do you want to guess where he was storing all those assets? Garrett asked quietly. I looked down at the commercial lease agreement on my desk. 4,000 square foot warehouse space in Skokie. The warehouse, I whispered. Exactly. The feds raided that Skokie warehouse yesterday. They seized millions in stolen inventory, and the name on the lease for the facility holding all those stolen goods is yours. I felt the room tilt. I wasn't just dealing with a ruined credit score and a desperate ex-girlfriend. I was officially tied to a federal wire fraud investigation. My forged signature was the anchor holding a criminal enterprise to a physical location. They're going to come talk to you, Garrett said. The FBI, or the ERCID, probably both. You need to print out every text message from her, your breakup timeline, your bank statements proving you never deposited a dime of that LLC money, and the courier receipt from when you kicked her out. You are going to build a binder of evidence proving you had no idea this business was operating. I spent the next 6 hours doing exactly that. I didn't eat, I didn't drink any water, I just printed, highlighted, and organized. At 6 o'clock, I heard the electronic chime of my front door unlocking. It was Claire. She walked in carrying a bag of Thai takeout, wearing her tailored work coat, her dark hair pulled back in a neat clip. She took one look at my face, dropped the takeout on the kitchen island, and walked straight over to me. What happened? She asked. I pointed to the dining table, which was completely covered in credit reports, the forged lease, and federal indictment press releases I had printed off the Department of Justice website. Claire worked as a senior compliance auditor for a massive logistics firm. She looked at financial ruin for a living. She didn't gasp or offer empty platitudes. She just pulled out a chair, picked up the forged lease, and started reading. She used your old W-2s to bypass the income verification, Claire noted. tracing the lines with her finger, and she forged this signature. But look at the notary stamp. She tapped a faint blue seal at the bottom of the page. It's notarized by a guy named Julian Mercer. You weren't there to sign it, so this notary committed fraud too. If Dex was running a ring, this notary is likely on his payroll. That's your out. She looked up at me, her eyes sharp and focused. We find the notary. We prove he wasn't in your presence when this was signed. The lease is invalidated as fraudulent. I felt a microscopic fraction of the weight lift off my chest. Garrett told me I have to go to the police and file the identity theft report tonight to freeze the line of credit. He's right. Eat some noodles. Then we go to the precinct together. We ate in total silence. My stomach was in knots, but I forced the food down. We left the condo at 7:30. The air outside was biting cold, the Chicago wind whipping off the lake. When we got to the precinct, I asked to speak to a detective regarding a major financial fraud and identity theft case. Because of the dollar amount and the federal implications with Dex's indictment, they didn't just hand me a clipboard and a form. They put me in a small interview room with a detective named Halvorsen. Halvorsen was a tired-looking guy in a rumpled suit. He listened to my story, took my binder of evidence, and looked at the forged lease. Tara Voss, he said, reading her name off my statement. He typed something into his computer terminal. He stopped. He scrolled down, his brow furrowing. You said she was just at your apartment this morning? Halvorsen asked, looking up at me. Yes, screaming at my door. She said she was sleeping in her car. Halvorsen turned the monitor slightly. Well, she's not sleeping in her car tonight. She was picked up by state troopers on I-90 about 2 hours ago. For what? I asked. Fleeing the scene of a vehicular collision, Halvorsen read. She rear-ended a minivan at a toll plaza and tried to run on foot. When they ran her plates, the car came back registered to Dexter Vance. The car had an active federal seizure warrant on it. They brought her in, and she's currently sitting in a holding cell 2 towns over. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the desk. But here's the interesting part. When they booked her, she refused to use her one phone call on a lawyer. She called a number, left a voicemail, and gave the troopers a statement. What statement? She claims she didn't steal your identity, Halvorsen said quietly. She claims you were a silent partner in the LLC, that you knew exactly what Dexter Vance was doing in that warehouse, and that you masterminded the lease to keep your name off the federal radar. I stared at him. The sheer absurdity of the accusation felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. I didn't yell. I didn't panic. I just slowly reached across the metal table, placed my hand flat on the thick binder I had spent the last 6 hours assembling, and pushed it across the scratched surface toward him. Open it, I said. Halvorsen looked at my hand, then at the binder. He flipped the cover open. Tab 1, I told him, my voice completely deadened. That's a printed screenshot of the text message I intercepted between Tara and Dexter Vance on the night of my grandparents' anniversary party, the night I kicked her out. Read what it says. Halvorsen scanned the page. Babe, pretend to love whatever cheap gift he gives you tonight. Once his bonus clears, we're taking the Porsche to Cabo. Right, now look at tab 2, I said. That's the receipt from a premium courier service dated that exact same night at 2:30 a.m. The delivery address is Dexter Vance's townhouse. The cargo was 12 boxes of Tara's personal belongings. Now look at tab 3. It's my cell phone records. You will see that I blocked her number at 2:45 a.m. that night, and there is zero outgoing communication from me to her or to Dexter Vance for the last 7 months. Halvorsen was quiet, turning the pages. I am a logistics director for a Fortune 500 company, I continued. I make a very good living. I do not need to mastermind a lease for a criminal I have never met, for a business I kicked out of my house over half a year ago. She is lying because she got caught. She is broke, and she is desperate to drag me down to leverage my money to save herself. Claire sat perfectly still next to me, her posture rigid, letting me speak. Halvorsen sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He closed the binder. Look, I believe you. The timeline here makes her look like a vindictive ex throwing a Hail Mary. But you need to understand something. Because the feds seized that warehouse, and because Dexter Vance is looking at a massive federal indictment, her statement isn't just local noise anymore. The state troopers forwarded her interview to the federal prosecutor's office. My stomach tightened. Meaning what? Meaning I can take your identity theft report right now, Halvorsen said. I can give you the case number so you can freeze the bank lines of credit and start disputing the fraudulent lease. But you are going to get a knock on your door from the FBI. They have to run down every lead, especially when a suspect names a supposed co-conspirator. You need a lawyer, a very good one, not a buddy who does corporate contracts. You need a white-collar defense attorney, and you need to put them on retainer tomorrow. We left the precinct at 9:45. The drive back to my condo was mostly silent. The case number for the identity theft report was tucked into my coat pocket, but it felt like a hollow victory. Yes, I had taken the first step to clear the $85,000 debt, but the reality of what Halvorsen had said was sinking in. I was about to be investigated by the federal government. Claire unlocked the door to my condo and turned on the lights. She walked into the kitchen, poured 2 glasses of water, and slid one across the island to me. We pull your bank records dating back 3 years, she said, her tone steady. All business. Every single transaction. We prove that not a single cent from Terra Designs LLC or from any entity connected to Vance ever entered your accounts. We build a wall of paper between your finances and hers. It's going to cost thousands just to retain a lawyer, I said, rubbing my eyes. Garrett mentioned a guy he knows, Ellis Brennan, supposedly a shark with federal fraud cases. His retainer is probably $25,000. hand. Then you pay it, Claire said firmly. You have the savings. This isn't the time to be cheap. You buy the best shield you can afford, and you let him crush her. I nodded slowly. She was right. I couldn't afford to hesitate. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind running through every possible worst-case scenario. When my alarm went off at 6 a.m., I felt like I had been hit by a truck. I made coffee, showered, and put on a suit. I had to go into the office. I couldn't hide at home, and I needed to keep my routine as normal as possible while the storm gathered. I got to the office at 8. The logistics floor was already buzzing. I sat down at my desk, booted up my computer, and immediately drafted an email to Ellis Brennan, the lawyer Garrett had recommended. I requested an urgent consultation. At 9:15 a.m., my desk phone rang. It was Marcus, the VP. Can you come up to my office? He asked. His voice didn't have its usual booming, friendly cadence. It was tight. Clipped. On my way, I said. I took the elevator up to the executive floor. When I walked into Marcus's corner office, he wasn't alone. Sitting on the leather sofa across from his desk was HR Director Vivian Strand. My heart dropped into my stomach. Marcus gestured to one of the chairs opposite his desk. Close the door and take a seat. I shut the heavy glass door and sat down. Vivian had a manila folder resting on her lap. She didn't look at me. She just stared at a spot on the desk. I received a phone call this morning, Marcus started, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his desk, from an agent with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. They were asking to confirm your employment status, your salary, and your specific responsibilities regarding our corporate warehousing contracts. The air in the room felt suddenly very thin. Marcus, I can explain, I said quickly. He held up a hand, stopping me. They informed me that your name is listed as the primary guarantor on a commercial warehouse lease in Skokie, a warehouse that was raided 2 days ago and found to contain millions of dollars in stolen goods tied to a federal wire fraud ring. It's identity theft, I said, my voice steady, though my hands were clammy. My ex-girlfriend stole my old tax returns and forged my signature to secure that lease for her new boyfriend, the man who was actually running the fraud. I filed a police report last night. I have the case number right here. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the slip of paper Halvorsen had given me, sliding it across the desk. Marcus looked at the paper, but he didn't pick it up. He looked at Vivian. Vivian opened her folder. We appreciate that you are taking steps to clear this up, she said, her voice dripping with corporate neutrality. However, you are the director of logistics for this company. You oversee millions of dollars in supply chain movement and warehouse leasing. Having your name publicly attached to a federally rated storage facility, even fraudulently, is a massive liability for this firm. I am a victim of a crime, I said, looking between them. I found out about this yesterday, and we are sympathetic to that, Marcus said heavily. But the optics are disastrous. If our clients catch wind that our logistics director is being investigated by the feds for a warehouse fraud scheme, we could lose accounts. We can't have you actively managing our supply chain while federal agents are digging through your life. So what are you saying? I asked, though I already knew. We are placing you on administrative leave, effective immediately, Vivian said. It will be paid for now, but you are to hand over your company laptop, your key card, and your corporate phone. You are locked out of the system as of 5 minutes ago. You cannot contact any vendors or clients. I sat back in the chair. It felt like the floor had opened up beneath me. I had worked for this company for 6 years. I had billed 70-hour weeks to earn that promotion. I had missed holidays and birthdays to keep their supply chains running during global crises. And in a 5-minute meeting, because of a forged signature, I was being marched out the door. How long? I asked. Until the federal investigation is officially closed and you provide us with a document from the U.S. Attorney's Office completely exonerating you, Marcus said, which could take months or years. I didn't argue. There was no point. HR protocols in situations like this were ironclad. I handed over my badge. I gave them my phone. I went down to my office, packed up my personal belongings into a small cardboard box, and took the elevator to the parking garage under the watchful eye of a security guard. I drove home in a daze. It was barely 11 in the morning and my career was effectively paralyzed. When I walked into the condo, my personal cell phone was ringing. It was a 312 area code I didn't recognize. I answered it. Is this him? A sharp, gravelly voice asked. Who is this? Ellis Brennan. Garrett called me this morning and told me you'd be reaching out. I just got your email. He said you got caught up in the Dexter Vance suite. My ex-girlfriend forged my signature on his lease, I said, walking into the kitchen and setting the cardboard box on the counter. And when she got arrested last night for fleeing a car crash, she told the state police I was a silent partner in Vance's fraud. Ellis let out a low whistle. She's throwing you under the bus to get a plea deal. Typical bottom feeder strategy. Has the FBI or EARS contacted you directly yet? They contacted my boss this morning, I said, the bitterness rising in my throat. I just got put on indefinite administrative leave. Good, Ellis said. I blinked. Good? I just lost my job. Good because it means they are doing background checks before they kick your door in, Ellis corrected. It means they haven't secured an arrest warrant. They're building a profile. We have a window to get ahead of this. Can you be at my office in the loop by 1 o'clock? Bring every financial document you have, the binder you took to the cops, and a cashier's check for $25,000. I'll be there. I spent the next hour at the bank withdrawing the retainer from my emergency savings. Watching the balance drop by $25,000 made me physically sick. It was money I had saved for a down payment on a house, maybe an engagement ring for Claire down the line. Now it was going toward cleaning up Tara's mess. Ellis Brennan's office was on the 42nd floor of a sleek glass high-class high-rise. He wasn't what I expected. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in his 50s, wearing a high-end cashmere sweater and slacks with sharp, perceptive eyes that seemed to scan everything in the room simultaneously. We sat down in his conference room. I slid the check across the table. He didn't even look at it. He pulled my binder toward him and started flipping through the pages, much faster than Halvorsen had. Okay, the timeline is tight, Ellis muttered, tracing the courier receipt. You kick her out. 7 months later, the warehouse gets raided. During that 7-month gap, Vance runs hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen goods through the space. Who paid the rent? Tara said Vance did. For the first 6 months. Then he stopped. Vance didn't pay it in his own name, Ellis said, shaking his head. He's a fraudster, not an idiot. He paid it through the LLC. Tara Designs, the entity she set up using your forged signature as the guarantor. He looked up at me, which means there is a bank account out there in the name of Tara Designs LLC. And if she used your social and your tax returns to get the lease and the line of credit, there is a very high probability your name is on that bank account too. My blood ran cold. I never signed anything at a bank. You didn't have to, Ellis said. Remember the notary, Julian Mercer, the guy who stamped the forged lease? If he stamped the lease, he stamped the corporate banking resolution. He verified your identity on paper without you being in the room. Ellis leaned back in his chair. The feds follow the money. If Vance transferred stolen funds into that LLC account to pay the rent, and your name is on that account, you are technically a co-signer on an account receiving stolen federal funds. That's why she told the cops you were a silent partner. She knows your name is on the bank paper. She's trying to establish that you were controlling the money. I felt like the walls were closing in. Every time I thought I found the bottom of the hole Tara had dug for me, the floor gave way again. How do we prove I didn't control it? I asked. We subpoena the access logs from the bank, Ellis said. IP addresses for the online banking logins, ATM camera footage if there were cash withdrawals. We prove that the only people accessing that money were Tara and Dexter Vance. But more importantly, we need to find Julian Mercer, the notary. Exactly. A crooked notary is the linchpin to this entire fraud. If we find him and squeeze him, he flips. He admits Vance paid him to stamp forged documents. The moment Mercer admits he faked the notarization on the LLC documents, the legal anchor tying you to this mess dissolves. The feds drop you as a suspect, and the bank drops you as a guarantor. Ellis pulled out his phone and tapped the screen a few times. I have a private investigator I use for these types of corporate messes. Ex-Chicago PD. Guy named Fletcher. I'm putting him on Mercer right now. How long will that take? A few days. Maybe a week, Ellis said. He stood up. In the meantime, you go home. You do not answer numbers you don't recognize. If agents show up at your door, you do not let them in without a warrant, and you give them my card. You say absolutely nothing else. Understood? Understood. I left his office and took the train back to my neighborhood. The afternoon sun was pale and weak. I felt hollowed out. I had spent my entire adult life doing everything by the book, playing it safe, saving money, and one toxic relationship had infected my life so deeply that it was currently tearing down everything I had built. When I got back to the condo, I checked the mail. Just bills and junk flyers. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl by the entrance. I took off my coat and walked into the living room. Sitting on my sofa, casually flipping through a magazine, was a man I had never seen before. He was wearing a dark, tailored suit. He looked up when I walked in, closed the magazine, and placed it neatly on the coffee table. Nice place, he said quietly. I froze, my hand instinctively reaching back toward the front door. Who the hell are you? How did you get in here? Your electronic lock, the man said, gesturing toward the door. It's a good model, but the backup physical cylinder is easily bypassed if you have the right tension wrench. I apologize for the intrusion, but I needed to speak with you privately, before the government gets too deeply involved. I'm calling the police, I said, pulling my phone out of my pocket. You can do that, the man said, not moving a muscle. But if you do, the $60,000 in cash currently sitting in the trunk of a rental car down the street disappears. And you'll have to pay Ellis Brennan out of your own pocket to fight a battle you are going to lose. I stopped. My thumb hovered over the keypad. How do you know about Ellis? I know a lot of things, the man said, standing up smoothly. He wasn't intimidating in a physical sense. He was average height, slim, but he carried himself with a quiet, absolute authority. My name is Rowan Ashby. I represent certain financial interests that were, unfortunately, tied up in Dexter Vance's operations. I don't know anything about Vance's operations, I said, gripping my phone tightly. I know you don't, Rowan said. I know Tara Voss forged your signature. I know Julian Mercer stamped it. I know you are entirely innocent in this matter. Then why are you in my apartment? Because, Rowan said, taking a slow step forward, Dexter Vance owes my clients a significant amount of money. Money that he funneled through Tara Designs LLC. The federal government seized the warehouse, but they did not find the offshore accounts where Vance routed the surplus cash. Only 2 people had administrative access to those offshore routing numbers. He paused, looking me dead in the eye. Dexter Vance, who is currently sitting in federal lockup without bail, and Tara Voss. I stared at him. Tara doesn't know anything about offshore accounts. She came to my door yesterday begging for a place to sleep. She was completely broke. Rowan offered a small, cold smile. Tara Voss is a very good actress. She didn't come here because she was homeless. She came here because she needed access to your IP address. I stopped breathing. My Wi-Fi. Exactly, Rowan said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. She lived here for 2 years. Her devices remember your network. The second she stepped out of the elevator and got within range of your door, her phone automatically connected to your router, while she was out in your hallway screaming about being homeless, pounding on the wood and creating a massive distraction. She was logged into the offshore portals using your home network. She initiated wire transfers for over $2 million, and to the FBI Cyber Division, it looks exactly like the routing came from your living room. My stomach turned over. The Zoom call, the disturbed neighbor distraction. She knew I worked from home on Wednesdays. She knew I'd be tied up in meetings and wouldn't open the door immediately. The entire hysterical breakdown was a calculated smokescreen to spoof my IP address. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice tight. If you know she did it, why are you here? Because I want my client's money back, Rowan said flatly. And I can't get it if the FBI freezes the receiving accounts first. I have zero interest in you, your job, or your ex-girlfriend. But I know you hired Ellis Brennan, which means you're going to fight. If you point the feds blindly at the offshore accounts, the money gets tied up in government litigation for the next decade. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, encrypted black flash drive. He set it gently on the glass coffee table. On this drive is the complete digital footprint of the transfer, Rowan said. It includes the MAC address of the specific physical device that authorized the wires. It's Tara's phone, the one currently sitting in an evidence locker with the state troopers. Give this to your lawyer. Give it to the feds. It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the device connected to your Wi-Fi belonged to her, not you. I stared at the drive. What do you get out of this? I get a 48-hour head start before you hand that drive over to Ellis, Rowan said. That's all I need to intercept the funds on the other end before the federal freeze hits. You get your life back. I get my client's money. And Tara Voss takes the fall for the entire thing. He didn't wait for me to agree. He didn't ask for a handshake. He just turned, walked out my front door, and pulled it shut behind him. I heard the lock click. I stood in the center of my living room for a long time, staring at the black flash drive on the glass. I didn't touch it. I walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and drank it in one breath. Then I set a timer on my phone for 48 hours. I didn't sleep much over the next 2 days. I kept the drive locked in my desk drawer. When the timer finally went off on Friday afternoon, I put the drive in my pocket, took an Uber to the Loop, and walked into Ellis Brennan's office. I didn't tell him about Rowan. I just told him a private cybersecurity contact had managed to pull my router logs and isolate the MAC address of the device that had been piggybacking on my network during the exact window of the wire fraud. Ellis plugged the drive into an air-gapped laptop, read the data, and leaned back in his chair with a slow, predatory smile. She really thought she was smarter than everyone, he murmured. Fletcher found our notary, by the way, Julian Mercer. Found him drinking at a dive bar in Logan Square. Took him about 10 minutes to admit Dexter Vance paid him $1,000 cash per signature to stamp LLC documents without you present. He's willing to sign a sworn affidavit to avoid federal prison. Ellis looked up at me. We have the forged signature proven. We have the IP spoofing proven. We have the MAC address tying the device to her physical person at the exact minute the funds moved. I'm calling the U.S. Attorney's Office right now. The dominoes didn't fall instantly, but when they started, they fell hard. The FBI took the flash drive and cross-referenced the MAC address with Tara's phone in state custody. It was a perfect match. They pulled the Zoom recording from my company's servers, which clearly showed me sitting on camera, presenting a slide deck during the exact timestamps the wire transfers were being initiated from a mobile device outside my door. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable cyber evidence and Mercer's sworn affidavit, the federal prosecutors completely dropped me as a person of interest. The bank, presented with the same evidence, immediately invalidated the $85,000 line of credit and the $60,000 commercial lease. My credit score bounced back to 810 within 3 weeks. Tara didn't get a plea deal. When the feds realized she wasn't just Vance's oblivious girlfriend, but an active co-conspirator who had personally executed the offshore transfers and committed felony identity theft, they threw the book at her. She was indicted on 6 counts of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy. A month later, Marcus called me. He sounded incredibly cheerful, using his booming executive voice as if the last month hadn't happened. He told me the company had received the official exoneration letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office. He told me my administrative leave was lifted, and they were ready to welcome me back to the logistics floor with a 5% raise for the misunderstanding. I let him finish his pitch. I didn't interrupt. Marcus, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. When I needed the company's backing, you locked me out of the system in 5 minutes and had me escorted to the parking garage. Keep the 5%. I accept your severance package, and my formal resignation is already in your inbox. I hung up before he could respond. It was the most satisfying click of a phone I had ever experienced. I didn't need their 5%. With my resume and a completely clear background check, I had leveraged the situation into a senior director role at a rival logistics firm, complete with a 20% pay bump and a massive signing bonus. That night, Claire and I sat on the balcony of my condo. The Chicago skyline was lit up, the air finally warming up for the summer. We were drinking a very expensive bottle of wine I had bought to celebrate the new job. I looked out over the city, listening to the distant hum of traffic. The heavy, suffocating weight that had been sitting on my chest for over a year was completely gone. I didn't know what Rowan Ashby had done with the offshore money, and I didn't care. I had my home. I had my career. I had a partner who actually stood by me when the floor floor dropped out. And somewhere in a federal holding facility, Tara Voss was finally realizing that there was no one left to pay her bills.